Welcome to the debate. If you are listening to this right now, you might be asking yourself why we are about to spend the next chunk of our time, dissecting a massive stadium-ready dance pop track as if it were a PhD thesis. But I think that is exactly the magic of the material we're looking at today.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's hard to think of another artist who can just, drop a new disco beat and immediately send Victorian scholars and music critics into a complete tailspin.
Exactly. We are talking, of course, about Taylor Swift's October 2025 release, The Fate of Ophelia. It's the lead single and the opening track from her 12th studio album, The Life of a Showgirl.
Right.
Now, for some quick context, this album arrived right on the heels of the historic Erasers tour. And, where the Tortured Poets department was deeply melancholic, this new project is a very vibrant, highly theatrical exploration of the showgirl archetype. It's all about the contrast between that gladiator-like persona you need to survive on a stadium stage and the very quiet, very vulnerable reality behind the curtain.
And the absolute focal point of that contrast is this track. I mean, she takes the classic Shakespearean tragedy of Ophelia, a woman who is famously driven to madness and drowns in a stream, and completely rewrites the ending.
Yeah, completely flips it.
Right, so instead of drowning, Ophelia is pulled from the water by a devoted lover, which really brings us to the central tension of our discussion today.
Yes, the big question.
Does The Fate of Ophelia represent a masterful, empowering subversion of classic tragedy that actually reclaims female survival? Or, and this is where I land, does it intellectually sanitize a deeply complex narrative of systemic oppression, replacing it with a regressive, male savior commercial fantasy?
Right. And you and I fall on very different sides of this.
We really do.
Yeah.
Where I land on this is that The Fate of Ophelia is a brilliant pop mechanism. I think Swift successfully rewrites a story of, passive female victimization into a modern triumphant anthem of survival.
And I firmly believe the track is a shallow literary whitewash. It strips Ophelia of her agency and reduces incredibly complex feminist themes into a simplistic damsel in distress narrative.
Well, let's start with the thematic architecture. Swift is very deliberately using the showgirl archetype here, which is inherently contradictory, right? Sure. You represent the absolute extreme of glamorous spectacle, but you are harboring deep internal vulnerability at the same time. We see this all over the record. So when we arrive at The Fate of Ophelia, she gives us this incredibly upbeat Max Martin and Shellback production. It's that classic crying at the discotheque trope.
Oh, heavily, yeah.
And it subverts the dark lyrical themes of purgatory and madness. By changing Ophelia's fate, Swift is actively rejecting the idea that a tragic heroine has to die to be profound. She's choosing life over tragedy.
I hear that, but...
Well, the foundation of that survival narrative completely crumbles when you look at the mechanics of how she actually achieves it. Let's look at Ophelia in Shakespeare's Hamlet. Her drowning is arguably her only moment of true agency in the entire play.
Wait, really? Drowning is agency? Walk me through that. Think about her life. I mean, her entire existence is dictated by the patriarchal figures around her. Her father, Polonius, uses her as a political pawn. Her brother, Laertes, polices her sexuality. Hamlet verbally and psychologically abuses her.
Right. It's a bleak situation.
It is. So her descent into madness and her eventual drowning is a refusal to participate any longer in a world that gives her no voice. It's a tragedy, yes, but it is an indictment of systemic misogyny.
Okay, I see where you're going with the source material.
So when Swift decides to have a male lover literally dig her out of her grave, a lover who is, let's be honest, transparently modeled after her real-life partner Travis Kelce, she entirely misinterprets the source material.
I don't know if misinterprets is the right word.
Well, she replaces a powerful indictment of systemic oppression with a white knight trope. And frankly, in 2025, that aligns incredibly uncomfortably with regressive trad wife aspirations. This internet-fueled idealization of women returning to submissive 1950s homemaker roles, where their ultimate salvation is just a strong man. It's not survival, it is a transfer of ownership.
Wait, misinterprets or intentionally reimagines? Because I really want to push back on this idea of ownership. Is finding a safe harbor in an equal romantic partnership truly a loss of agency?
In this specific context, yes.
Let's look at how she actually sets the scene in the opening verse, though. She sings, "I heard you calling on the megaphone. You want to see me all alone. As legend has it, you are quite the pyro. You light the match to watch it blow."
Right, the megaphone being the chaos of her public life.
Exactly. The stadium, the fans, the massive noise. The lover isn't taking ownership of her in those lyrics. He is providing a disruptive energy, the pyro, that shatters the isolation of her fame. She isn't being scooped up against her will, you know? She is actively choosing to let someone in to break the cycle.
But the framing of that choice creates a staggering ideological clash within the album itself. I mean, have you considered how this sits next to track 4, Father Figure?
The song about the music industry power structures?
Yes. Father Figure is widely interpreted as her commentary on the fallout with Scott Borchetta and Scooter Braun. And in that track, she samples George Michael and sings, "I was your father figure, you pulled the wrong trigger, this empire belongs to me."
Yeah, that's a great track.
It is an incredibly aggressive assertion of dominance. We have a narrator who is a ruthless, empire-owning titan. How does that woman, the CEO who literally crushes her enemies, coexist with the narrator of the Fate of Ophelia, who sings about sitting alone in a tower waiting for a man who honed his powers to come save her?
I actually don't see those as mutually exclusive.
You don't see a contradiction there at all? The Opiate magazine had a fantastic piece on this. They pointed out that Ophelia's life in the play was defined by being passed between men like a football.
Yes.
To have her saved by an actual football player doesn't liberate her. It reinforces the idea that a woman's ultimate refuge from the world is still just a strong man.
That's a great line from the Opiate, I'll admit, but it completely misses the psychological reality of the album. The contrast between the titan and father figure and the vulnerable girl in Ophelia isn't a contradiction. It's the emotional core of the record. Think of it like a deep-sea diver.
Okay, a deep-sea diver. Go on.
On the surface, working in the crushing depths of the music industry, she is in this massive, heavy, impenetrable iron suit. That's the narrator of Father Figure. But Ophelia is what happens when she finally gets back to the decompression chamber and takes the helmet off.
I mean, that's a poetic way to look at it.
The vulnerability doesn't negate the armor. It requires it. You can be a ruthless business mogul and also be utterly exhausted by the gladiator arena, desiring a safe harbor. And crucially, if you look at the bridge, she sings, "'Tis locked inside my memory, and only you possess the key."
The reoccurring key motif?
Yes, which she uses in track 9 would as well. The lover doesn't just throw her over his shoulder like a damsel. He provides the means for her escape. She still has to walk through the door.
Well, if we're calling her the architect of her own survival, we have to look at the tools she is using to build that narrative. And frankly, the language she uses fundamentally misunderstands the original text. The intellectual integrity of the adaptation is incredibly flimsy.
Flimsy how? Just because she doesn't follow the plot word for word?
No, not because of strict plotting, but because she creates a false reality to justify the pop narrative. In the second verse, she summarizes Ophelia's tragedy by saying, "Love was a cold bed full of scorpions. The venom stole her sanity." It sounds incredibly dramatic, right?
Very Shakespearean, yeah.
Very Shakespearean, except there are no scorpions in Hamlet. None.
Right. Well, she's pulling that imagery from Macbeth, or maybe just inventing it.
Exactly. She is creating this bizarre Mandela effect for her listeners, where millions of people now collectively misremember a classic text because a pop song told them to. Shakespearean scholars have rightfully called this out. Framing Ophelia's life as a fantasy ruined by venom completely diminishes the brutal systemic reality of her oppression that we just talked about.
I hear the frustration from the scholars, I really do, but I think that assumes a pop song must adhere to strict academic literary fidelity. Why does a synth pop track need to pass a peer-reviewed literature check? The scorpions are just a metaphor for toxic, poisonous love that ruins your mental state.
Because when you invoke a character as culturally weighty as Ophelia, you are invoking centuries of history regarding female madness and marginalization in literature. You owe the text a baseline level of respect, But instead of exploring that depth, she jumps into a post-chorus that drops classic metaphors entirely and adopts Gen Z internet slang.
Oh, you're talking about the keep it 100 line.
Yes. Keep it 100 on the land, the sea, the sky. Pledge allegiance to your hands, your team, your vibes. It is incredibly jarring. And critics have pointed out the cultural reappropriation here. Keep It 100 is African American Vernacular English, or AAVE.
Right.
So using AAVE and words like vibes to describe the idealized tragic heroine of a 16th century English play feels like a massive misstep.
But is it a misstep or is it a deliberate choice to bridge the gap between the character and the artist?
I mean, Todd in the Shadows made a brilliant comparison in his review of this. He noted that giving a clean Hollywood ending to Romeo and Juliet worked perfectly for Love Story in 2008 when she was a teenager. It made total sense.
Sure, it fit the era.
But applying that same simplistic happy ending logic to a text as psychologically complex as Hamlet in 2025, it feels like a reduction of media literacy. It feels like dumbing down.
Especially when she admitted on the New Heights podcast that Kelsey had never actually read the play and she had to explain it to him.
Okay, but that clash of language, the jarring nature of it that you're talking about, is the entire point. The juxtaposition of Shakespearean tragedy with your team and your vibes isn't a mistake. It's a structural anchor.
How does using the word vibes anchor a tragedy exactly?
Because she is pulling this 16th century text through a portal into her 2024 stadium reality. When she says pyro or mentions your team, she is breaking the fourth wall. She is essentially telling the audience, I am not just singing about a fictional Danish noblewoman. I am singing about me right now, dealing with this unprecedented level of fame. The linguistic whiplash you feel is literally the sound of a classic archetype colliding with the modern pop machine.
A collision that, conveniently, smooths over all the difficult parts of the story.
Perhaps, but you can't deny how well that machine operates. I mean, the production on this track from MXM Studios in Stockholm is flawless. Max Martin and Shellback masterfully layered traditional country instruments like the steel guitars over a new disco bass line. Doing that without sounding like a disjointed mess is incredibly difficult.
Oh, I will absolutely grant you that. The production is incredibly slick. Serban Ginea's mixing is, as always, top tier. It forces you to tap your foot, even if you actively hate the lyrics.
Exactly. It's a sonic triumph. And the craftsmanship extends way beyond the audio. The visualizer for the track is a masterclass in world building. This is where Swift really anchors the Showgirl theme. For example, she explicitly recreates that famous 1850s painting of Ophelia in the water by John Everett Millais.
Yes, I noticed that.
But you know the history of that painting, right? The real-life model?
Elizabeth Siddal, yes. To get the pose right, the artist had her lay in a bathtub full of water for hours on end during the winter. The lamps keeping the water warm went out, and he didn't stop painting. She ended up catching severe pneumonia, and her health never fully recovered.
Right. So Siddal suffered immensely and was physically exploited in the name of creating this beautiful, passive art. By recreating that specific image, Swift is drawing a direct parallel between the historical exploitation of the muse and the modern exhaustion of the pop star. It's brilliant.
It's a clever reference, I'll give you that. But we really need to ask if this massive, hyperdense visual infrastructure actually acts as a shield against legitimate critique.
A shield in what way?
Think about how her visualizers work. They are packed with Easter eggs. There are 12 orange stars on a mirror, a specific type of sourdough bread on a table, a clock set to 10:03. By hiding all of these clues, Swift isn't just making a music video, she is gamifying her art.
Well, gamifying it for the fans. Yes, they love it.
Exactly. It triggers a dopamine loop for the viewer. You find the clue, you feel smart, you share it online. It's like a magician's misdirection. Look at the shiny object over here so you don't see what my other hand is doing.
I don't think it's misdirection.
The question is, does gamifying the visual distract the audience from the fact that the core literary premise is flawed? Are we too busy looking for secret messages to realize that she just stripped a tragic feminist icon of her agency?
I honestly think that underestimates her audience. The fans who are pausing the video to find the hidden word on the staircase are the exact same fans who are debating the feminist implications of the lyrics on Reddit. The lore doesn't distract from the art. The lore is the art. The engagement with the material is the ultimate goal.
But engagement doesn't inherently equal depth.
But the depth is there if you look for it. When we look at the track Elizabeth Taylor, she sings "Trade the Cartier for someone to trust" and "You're only as hot as your last hit, baby." Swift is acutely aware of the transactional nature of her existence. She knows what the crowd wants. So when she constructs the Fate of Ophelia, she isn't ignoring the tragedy of her environment. She's using it as a foil.
I'm not so sure.
By employing a new disco groove, a genre born out of marginalized communities finding joy and release on the dance floor, she is creating a sonic space for survival. It's a defiant act.
But is it actual survival? Or is it just a different kind of performance? I mean, that is the lingering question of the entire album. The final track, The Life of a Showgirl, features Sabrina Carpenter and includes actual crowd noise from a Vancouver concert.
Yeah, it's very immersive.
It explicitly highlights the exhaustion of playing a character. It makes you wonder if the Fate of Ophelia is truly about Swift finding salvation, or if the happy ending is just another act the showgirl has to put on because that's what the audience demands.
Wow. So you think the happy ending is just a performance?
I think the audience demands the fairy tale. They demanded Love Story in 2008, and they demand the football player saves the pop star narrative in 2025. By rewriting Ophelia's drowning into a romantic rescue, she's giving the crowd exactly what they want. But in doing so, she is sanitizing the haunting reality of a woman who is destroyed by the men around her. It's a comfortable lie replacing an uncomfortable truth.
That is a cynical but absolutely fascinating read of the album's conclusion. To sort of wrap up my position on this, though, I still firmly believe that the Fate of Ophelia stands as a triumph of modern pop architecture.
Fair enough.
Taylor Swift successfully utilizes a classic tragic archetype to express the very heavy psychological burden of the modern showgirl. It proves that a woman can acknowledge the crushing weight of her environments, the megaphone, the tower, the melancholy, and still demand her own happy ending. It is a defiant rejection of the idea that female pain must always end in tragedy to be taken seriously.
And to summarize my stance, while I cannot deny the track as a commercial juggernaut and a massive sonic achievement, those Max Martin synths are undeniable, it falls incredibly short as a literary adaptation. By taking a profound exploration of systemic female oppression and rewriting it so the heroine is literally dug out of her grave by a man, it sanitizes the art. It trades the haunting reality of Ophelia's lack of agency for a catchy but ultimately hollow savior fantasy that just regresses back to the oldest tropes in the book.
Well, what we can absolutely agree on, though, is the unique cultural phenomenon that Taylor Swift occupies. We are literally sitting here having a rigorous analytical discussion about the literary fidelity of a dance pop track.
It is astounding. The mere fact that a 3.5-minute pop song has triggered heated debates among Victorian scholars, Shakespearean academics, psychotherapists, and music critics proves her unparalleled weight in the global cultural zeitgeist. She writes a pop hook, and we all treat it like an academic text.
It really is a testament to her gravity. And there are so many layers left to explore in the life of a showgirl, from the raw vulnerability of Opalite to the sheer defiance of Canceled. It leaves you wondering, when the stadium lights finally shut off and the strobe lights at the discotheque fade, are we looking at a woman who finally escaped her tragedy, or just a showgirl stepping into a different costume?